She had everything money could buy: the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the private jet, the investment portfolio that made financial advisors weep with envy. At 52, Victoria Ashford was a self-made billionaire who had conquered Wall Street, built an empire from nothing, and earned the respect of titans twice her size. But as she stood alone in her marble bathroom at 3 in the morning, staring at her reflection after another charity gala filled with superficial conversations and calculated smiles, she realized she had never felt more empty. The world saw her as untouchable, a woman who needed nothing and no one. She had spent 3 decades building walls so high that even she had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable. After a devastating divorce at 35 that had taught her that people loved her money more than they loved her, Victoria had made a silent vow. Never again would she let anyone close enough to hurt her. Then came Daniel Martinez, 28 years old, with paint-stained fingers and a smile that seemed to hold sunlight. He was the artist commissioned to create a mural in her company's new headquarters. A nobody from Brooklyn who rode the subway and brought his lunch in a paper bag, he looked at her the way no one had looked at her in years, not at her net worth, not at her power, but at something she thought had died long ago: the woman beneath the armor. What happened between them would challenge everything Victoria believed about love, age, and worthiness. It would force her to choose between the safe walls she had built and the terrifying freedom of being truly seen. This is the story of how a woman who had everything discovered the one thing money could never buy. This is the story of how she learned to love again, how love taught her to live. Victoria Ashford's morning routine was legendary among her executive team. She woke at 5, completed a punishing workout with her personal trainer, reviewed markets during breakfast, and was at her desk by 7:30 sharp. She ran Ashford Capital Management with the precision of a Swiss watch and the ruthlessness of a general, having built it from a small investment firm into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse over 25 years. Her colleagues whispered about her always respectfully, always behind closed doors. The Ice Queen, they called her, though never to her face. She knew about the nickname and wore it like armor. Better to be feared than pitied, better to be powerful than vulnerable. She had learned that lesson the hard way when her ex-husband had tried to take half her company in the divorce, claiming he deserved credit for her success because he had supported her emotionally. The truth was more complicated than anyone knew. Victoria had once been warm, open, and full of dreams that extended beyond balance sheets and market shares. She had married young, at 26, believing that love and ambition could coexist. But as her success grew, so did her husband's resentment. He had affairs. He belittled her achievements, and when she finally found the courage to leave, he had hired the most aggressive lawyers money could buy, determined to punish her for outshining him. That battle had hardened something essential in her. She won. Of course, she always won, but victory had come at a cost. After the divorce was finalized, she threw herself into work with single-minded intensity. Relationships became transactions. Romance became a liability. She dated occasionally, always men of her own status, always keeping careful emotional distance, but nothing ever lasted beyond a few months. At 52, Victoria had accepted her reality. She had her work, her legacy, her impact on the world. She mentored young women in finance, donated millions to education initiatives, and sat on the boards of 3 major museums. If her bed was empty and her penthouse echoed with silence, well, that was simply the price of being exceptional. She had made her peace with it. Or so she told herself, right up until the morning she walked into the lobby of her new headquarters and saw a young man on scaffolding, transforming a blank wall into something that made her forget, just for a moment, how to breathe. The mural was supposed to represent innovation, ambition, and the future of finance. The design committee had selected Daniel Martinez from over 200 applicants, impressed by his portfolio of large-scale public artworks that somehow managed to be both technically brilliant and emotionally stirring. Victoria had approved the choice without much thought, was important for company culture, but she had more pressing concerns. She hadn't expected to care about watching it come to life. Yet she found herself taking different routes through the building, routes that just happened to pass through the main lobby. She told herself she was monitoring the project, ensuring the work met company standards. She didn't examine why she was suddenly noticing things like the way morning light slanted through the glass facade, or how the building's acoustics carried the sound of a young man humming while he worked. Daniel worked with complete absorption, seemingly unaware of the executives hurrying past below him. He wore old jeans, spattered with a rainbow of dried paint, and a faded t-shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair was perpetually messy, and he had a habit of biting his lower lip when he was concentrating. Victoria found herself watching the way his shoulders moved as he worked. The confidence of his brushstrokes, the occasional step back to assess his progress with a critical eye. He was beautiful, she realized one morning, and immediately felt foolish for the thought. Beautiful in the way young men could be all lean energy and unconscious grace. But it wasn't just his youth that struck her. It was something in his face, an openness that seemed almost naive in the sharp-edged world of corporate finance. He smiled at the security guards. He chatted with the cleaning staff. He seemed genuinely happy to be there, creating something. Their first real interaction happened by accident. Victoria was crossing the lobby early one morning when she heard a crash and a string of creative profanity. She looked up to see Daniel on the scaffolding, paint dripping from an overturned bucket, running down the wall in turquoise rivers. He looked absolutely stricken, staring at hours of work now destroyed. She should have called facilities management and continued to her office. Instead, she found herself climbing the scaffolding stairs, something her insurance company would have a heart attack about until she stood beside him on the platform. Up close, she could see gold flecks in his brown eyes and smell the faint scent of coffee and paint thinner. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. Daniel jumped, clearly not having expected the CEO of the company to materialize beside him. "Ms. Ashford, I'm so sorry. I'll fix this immediately." She held up a hand to stop the flood of apologies. "I asked how bad it is. Can you fix it?" He took a shaky breath, studying the wall with professional assessment. "Yes. Actually, ... double quotes, he tilted his head. "Actually, this might be better. See how the drips created these organic lines? I can work with that. Make it look intentional. More dynamic." Victoria looked at the ruins section, trying to see what he saw. Gradually, she began to perceive it the way the accident had created unexpected movement, breaking up what had been perhaps too controlled. "You see beauty in mistakes," she observed. Daniel glanced at her, something flickering in his expression. "I see potential in unexpected things," he said softly. "Some of the best art happens when you let go of control." The words hit her harder than they should have. She stood there a moment too long, caught in his gaze, before remembering herself. "Well, carry on then." She descended the scaffolding with as much dignity as she could muster. Very aware that he was watching her go, and even more aware that she wanted him to be. The next morning, Victoria did something she hadn't done in 15 years. She arrived at work carrying 2 cups of coffee. One was her usual, a precisely made cappuccino from the Italian place 3 blocks from her apartment. The other was a simple black coffee with room for cream, the kind you could get anywhere. She had no idea what Daniel drank, but she was about to find out. He was already at work when she arrived, even though it was barely 7. He looked tired, and she realized he must have stayed late fixing yesterday's accident. The turquoise disaster had been transformed into something striking controlled chaos that added energy to the entire composition. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. "Peace offering," she said, holding out the black coffee. Daniel looked down from the scaffolding, surprise evident on his face. For a moment, she felt absurd. What was she doing, bringing coffee to employees like some kind of intern? But then he smiled, and the morning felt suddenly brighter. "You didn't have to do that, Ms. Ashford." "Victoria," she heard herself say. "And I know I didn't have to. Consider it an apology for startling you yesterday." He climbed down, accepting the coffee with obvious pleasure. "This is perfect. Actually, I've been running on vending machine sludge all week." They stood together in the quiet lobby, the city just beginning to wake up outside the glass walls. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she had simply stood still like this, with no agenda, no meeting to rush to, just existing in a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, and she nodded. "Why finance? I mean, you're clearly brilliant at it, but was it what you always wanted?" The question caught her off guard. People asked her about market strategies, investment philosophies, leadership techniques. No one asked her about wanting. "I wanted security," she said finally, surprising herself with her honesty. "I grew up with nothing. My mother cleaned houses. I was good at math, good at understanding systems. Finance made sense. It was a way to ensure I'd never be powerless again." Daniel nodded slowly, as if her answer had confirmed something he suspected. "And art?" she asked, turning the question back on him. "Was that always your path?" His face lit up in a way that made her chest ache. "Always. My parents thought I was crazy. They wanted me to be a doctor or lawyer, something practical, but I literally can't imagine doing anything else. Creating something where nothing existed before, making people feel things, ... That's everything to me, even when it means struggling financially." Victoria asked, genuinely curious. Even then, he said without hesitation, "Money's important, sure, but it's not the point. The point is the work itself, the moment of creation. Everything else is just ... logistics." Victoria found herself staring at him as if he were speaking a foreign language. She had spent her entire adult life making money, the point of everything, measuring success in dollars and assets and market share. "You think I'm naive?" Daniel said, reading her expression. "No," she said quietly. "I think you're brave in a way I've never been." The admission hung between them, too honest, too revealing. She straightened, remembering herself, retreating into familiar professionalism. "Well, thank you for the conversation. Good work on recovering from yesterday's mishap." She walked away feeling his eyes on her back and wondering why a simple conversation about coffee and careers felt more intimate than anything she had experienced in years. That night, alone in her penthouse, she found herself thinking not about quarterly projections or board meetings, but about what it might feel like to care about something or someone more than she cared about being safe. The mural took 6 weeks to complete. 6 weeks during which Victoria found increasingly creative excuses to be in the main lobby. She reviewed documents there, she took phone calls while pacing beneath the scaffolding. She even started arriving earlier, telling herself it was about productivity, refusing to acknowledge that it might have something to do with a young artist who made her laugh and challenged her assumptions and looked at her like she was more than her net worth. They fell into a patterned coffee in the mornings, brief conversations that stretched longer than either intended. Daniel told her about growing up in Brooklyn, about parents who loved him but didn't understand him, about the teacher who had first recognized his talent. Victoria found herself sharing things she rarely discussed. The apartment she had lived in as a child, so small she could touch both walls at once. The scholarship that had changed her life, the loneliness of being the only woman in countless boardrooms. He asked questions that no one else asked. Not about her strategies or successes, but about her life. What did she do for fun? What made her laugh? When was the last time she had created something with her own hands? His curiosity was genuine, unmarred by the calculated networking that characterized most of her interactions. He seemed to actually want to know her. The day he finished the mural, Victoria felt an unexpected sense of loss. The lobby was transformed the wall now, a stunning representation of growth and innovation, abstract enough to avoid cliché, but powerful in its execution. Everyone agreed it was spectacular. The design committee was thrilled. Daniel's work would be featured in architectural magazines. It was, by every measure, a triumph. Victoria stood before it that evening after everyone else had gone home, trying to understand why success felt like grief. Daniel appeared beside her, his toolbox in hand, ready to leave for the last time. They stood in silence, looking at what he had created, both of them aware that this was goodbye. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Thank you. It was a good project," he replied. "Good space to work in, good coffee in the mornings." They should have said goodbye then. Should have shaken hands professionally and returned to their separate worlds, her to boardrooms and him to whatever came next. Instead, Victoria heard herself say, "There's an exhibition opening Friday at the Morgan Gallery. Contemporary artists, would you like to go?" The words were out before she could stop them, before she could remember all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. She saw surprise there and something else, hope, maybe, or curiosity. Like ... together, he asked. "Yes, like together," she said, fighting the urge to take it back, to laugh it off as mentorship or networking. "If you're interested." She kept her voice steady, casual, as if her heart wasn't hammering like she was 20 years old again. "I'm interested," he said softly. And the way he looked at her made it clear they both understood this wasn't about art. "But I should tell you, I can't afford gallery openings. I don't have the right clothes for that world." Victoria smiled. "Neither did I once. Wear whatever you want." "I stopped caring about dress codes around the same time I stopped caring what people think of me." That was a lie, of course. She cared very much what people would think, what they would say when they saw her with him, the speculation and gossip that would follow. She was 52, he was 28. She was a billionaire. He was an artist who probably had student loans. The optics were terrible. But standing there in the empty lobby, looking at the beautiful thing he had created, she found she cared about something else more. "Friday at 7, she said. "I'll text you the address." Daniel nodded, his smile slow and genuine. "It's a date." After he left, Victoria sat in the lobby for a long time, looking at the mural and wondering what the hell she was doing. She was opening a door she had kept locked for 17 years. She was making herself vulnerable. She was risking everything she had carefully constructed. And for what? For a man half her age who would probably realize she was too damaged, too controlled, too much and not enough all at once. But as she finally headed to her office, she found she was smiling. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than numb. She felt alive. Victoria changed clothes 4 times before the gallery opening. Everything looked wrong, too formal, too corporate, too desperate. She finally settled on black trousers and a silk blouse, minimal jewelry, her hair down instead of in its usual severe twist. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked almost ... soft. It was terrifying. Daniel was waiting outside the gallery when her car pulled up. He wore dark jeans and a button-down shirt, simple but clean, and he looked nervous. Victoria felt a rush of tenderness that surprised her. He had dressed up for this, for her. As she approached his face, transformed with a smile that made her forget every single reason she had spent the day convincing herself this was a mistake. "You look beautiful," he said simply. And the compliment landed differently than the polished flattery she usually received. This wasn't someone trying to gain favor or access. This was genuine appreciation, and it made her feel seen in a way that had nothing to do with power or status. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, and was rewarded with a laugh. Inside, the gallery buzzed with opening night energy, wine flowing, voices echoing off industrial concrete, people positioning themselves to be seen. Victoria recognized half the room: collectors, critics, socialites who treated art as a networking opportunity. Several people did double takes when they saw her, their eyes sliding to Daniel with barely concealed curiosity. Let them look, Victoria thought. Let them wonder. But Daniel wasn't paying attention to the social dynamics. He was absorbed in the art itself, moving from piece to piece with focused intensity. He stood before each work in silence, sometimes for minutes, really seeing it. Victoria found herself watching him more than the art, fascinated by his complete unself-consciousness. He didn't care who was watching or what they thought. He was simply fully present. "What do you see?" she asked, standing beside him in front of a particularly challenging P-abstract, chaotic, angry. Daniel tilted his head, considering. "Pain," he said finally, "but also defiance. Like the artist is saying I hurt, and I refuse to pretend I don't." He glanced at her. "What do you see?" Victoria looked at the canvas with new eyes, trying to move past aesthetic judgment into feeling. "I see... lack of control," she said slowly. "And I think that's what makes me uncomfortable. The artist is revealing something raw, something most people hide." "Is that a bad thing?" Daniel asked, revealing the raw parts. "In my world, yes," Victoria admitted. "Vulnerability is weakness. Emotion is a liability. You learn to keep everything locked down, or people will use it against you." Daniel turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she heard herself say, the admission escaping before she could stop it. They were standing close enough that she could see the paint still embedded under his fingernails, permanent evidence of his work. Close enough that when he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand, she felt it everywhere. His fingers were warm, slightly rough with calluses, real and present, and nothing like the manicured hands of the men in her usual circles. "Victoria," he said quietly, and the way he said her name, not Ms. Ashford. Not with deference or calculation, just her name made something crack in her chest. Around them, the gallery continued its sophisticated buzz, but they stood in their own suspended moment, hands touching, everything else falling away. She should pull back, should remember where they were, who might be watching, how this would look. Instead, she let her fingers curl around his, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. They ended up at a diner in Brooklyn at midnight, the gallery opening having felt simultaneously too short and too long. Victoria couldn't remember the last time she had been in a place like this. Vinyl booths, fluorescent lights, a laminated menu offering breakfast all day. It was so far from her usual world of Michelin stars and wine lists that it felt almost surreal. Daniel slid into a booth like he belonged there, which he probably did. "I used to come here after late nights painting," he explained, ordering coffee and pie without consulting the menu. "Best apple pie in Brooklyn. Trust me." Victoria ordered the same, not because she wanted pie, but because she wanted to be part of his world, to see it through his eyes. When it arrived, warm and generous with cinnamon, she took a bite and was surprised to find it actually was excellent. "So," Daniel said, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug, "can I ask you something?" Victoria tensed instinctively. This was usually when people asked about money, investments, insider information. "Why did you invite me to the gallery? And don't say it was just about mentorship or supporting local artists. I know what that looks like, and this wasn't it." His directness disarmed her. She could deflect, keep her walls up, maintain professional distance. Or she could tell the truth, which felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. "Because I wanted to see you again," she said quietly. "Because talking to you in the mornings became the part of my day I looked forward to most. Because you look at me like I'm a person instead of a portfolio." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria felt panic rising. She had miscalculated, revealed too much, ruined whatever this delicate thing was between them. But then he smiled, soft and genuine, and tinged with relief. "I was hoping you'd say that," he admitted. "Because I've been half in love with you since the third morning you brought me coffee." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and perfect. Victoria felt something breaking open in her chest, terrifying and exhilarating. "You know this is crazy," she said. "You're 28, I'm 52. People will have things to say, let them," Daniel replied with a shrug. "I stopped living for other people's approval around the same time I decided to be an artist instead of a doctor. It's not that simple for me," Victoria said, needing him to understand. "My reputation, my company built everything on being unassailable, untouchable. If people think I've single quotes double quotes," she couldn't finish the sentence. "Think you're what?" Human? Happy? Dating someone who makes you smile? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes serious. Victoria, I don't know much about your world, but I know what I see when you let your guard down. And what I see is someone incredible who's been alone for too long. Victoria felt tears threatening, which was absurd. She didn't cry, hadn't cried in years, except once at her mother's funeral. But something about sitting in this diner with this young man who seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses made her feel dangerously close to breaking. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Do what? Any of it. Dating, being vulnerable, letting someone in. I've spent 17 years making sure no one could hurt me again. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand in both of his. His touch was gentle, grounding. Then we'll figure it out together. Slowly, no pressure, no expectations, just ... Let's see what happens when you let someone care about you. It should have felt like too much, too fast. But sitting there in the fluorescent light of a Brooklyn diner, eating pie and holding the hand of a man who made her feel things she thought she'd buried forever, Victoria realized that maybe, just maybe, she was tired of being safe. Maybe it was time to be brave in a way that had nothing to do with boardrooms and everything to do with her heart. Monday morning brought reality crashing back. Victoria arrived at her office to find her chief operating officer waiting, his expression carefully neutral. There are photos, Marcus said without preamble, sliding his tablet across her desk. Victoria looked at the screen and felt her stomach drop. There she was, leaving the gallery with Daniel, their bodies close, clearly together. The headline read, "Ice Queen Melts. Billionaire CEO spotted with younger man." It's all over social media, Marcus continued. Financial blogs are picking it up. There's speculation about your judgment, questions about whether this affects your position at the company. Victoria forced herself to read the comments, some supportive, many cruel, most focused on the age gap and what it meant about her. Gold digger, cougar, desperate, pathetic. She should have expected this. Should have known that her private life would become public spectacle, that every choice would be analyzed and judged. This was exactly why she had kept herself locked down for 17 years. And yet, looking at the photo, she couldn't bring herself to regret Friday night. Daniel had texted her yesterday, and they had talked for hours. She had laughed more in that one phone conversation than in the entire previous month. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. He had been with her for 15 years, had seen her through the divorce and its aftermath. "I can have PR issue a statement. Position this as a private matter that has no bearing on your professional life." Victoria considered this the safe play, the smart play. Minimize, deflect, retreat into professional distance. "No," she said finally. "No statement. My personal life is my personal life. The company's fundamentals are strong. Our Q3 numbers speak for themselves. Anyone who wants to question my judgment based on who I have dinner with can take it up with our returns." Marcus nodded slowly, respect in his eyes. "And him, the artist. Are you going to see him again?" Victoria thought about Daniel's paint-stained fingers and genuine smile. She thought about how he made her feel alive instead of armored. "Yes," she said, "I am. But saying it was easier than doing it." Over the next few days, the scrutiny intensified. Clients called with concerns. Board members suggested discreet conversations about optics. Her ex-husband gave an interview implying this proved she had always valued youth over substance. Worst of all was the email from her mother. "Be careful, Mia. Men like that always want something." Victoria stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of all her history, all her fear. Her mother had been hurt too many times by men who promised everything and delivered nothing. She had raised Victoria to be suspicious, to protect herself, to never depend on anyone. When Daniel called that evening, Victoria almost didn't answer. It would be so easy to end this now, before it went any further, before she gave him the power to hurt her. But she thought about the diner, about his hands holding hers, about the way he looked at her art like it held secrets. She answered, I saw the articles, Daniel said immediately. I'm so sorry, Victoria. I never thought AI should have realized people would stop, she interrupted. This isn't your fault. This is just my life. Everything I do gets scrutinized. Do you want to stop seeing me? He asked quietly. Would that make it easier? Victoria closed her eyes, standing at a crossroads. She could say yes, could retreat to safety, could go back to being untouchable and alone, or she could choose something else. No, she said firmly, I don't want to stop. But Daniel, this is going to get worse before it gets better. People are going to say terrible things. They're going to question your motives and my judgment. They're going to make assumptions about both of us. Let them, Daniel said simply. I know why I'm here, and I think you do too. Everyone else can think whatever they want. The turning point came at a board meeting 3 weeks later. Victoria was presenting Q4 projections when one of the older board members, a man who had voted against her promotion to CEO years ago, interrupted. Before we continue, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Victoria, your recent personal choices have raised concerns about your judgment and the company's reputation. The room went silent. Victoria felt every eye on her, waiting to see how she would respond. The old Victoria would have crushed this challenge immediately, would have marshaled data and demonstrated why her personal life was irrelevant to company performance. But as she stood there, she found herself thinking about Daniel, about the diner, about what it meant to live authentically instead of safely. My personal choices, she said slowly, are exactly that personal. I've led this company through 2 recessions, grown assets under management by 300%, and maintained returns that consistently beat market benchmarks. My track record speaks for itself. The board member shifted in his chair. Nevertheless, optics matter. The age difference, the nature of the relationship, Victoria interrupted, her voice sharp. Is that I'm dating someone who makes me happy, someone who treats me with respect and kindness, someone who sees me as a person rather than a balance sheet. If that threatens you, I suggest the problem is yours, not mine. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. I've spent my entire career proving I belong in rooms like this. I've worked harder, stayed later, sacrificed more than most of you can imagine. And I'm done apologizing for having a life outside these walls. If the board feels my personal relationships disqualify me from leadership, then you have options. But I won't hide who I am or who I care about to make anyone comfortable. I won't live half a life to preserve optics. The room was absolutely silent. Then the board chair, a woman who had been Victoria's mentor early in her career, spoke up. I think what Victoria is saying is that we hired her for her business acumen, not her personal choices. And her business acumen remains exceptional. Others nodded slowly. The challenging board member looked frustrated, but said nothing more. The meeting continued, tension gradually dissipating, but something had shifted. Victoria had drawn a line, had chosen herself and her happiness over approval. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That evening, she stood in her penthouse, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed Daniel, asking if she wanted company. For years, this space had been her fortress, her retreat from the world. She had never let anyone in, had kept it pristine and empty and perfectly controlled. Inviting him here felt like the ultimate vulnerability. She typed back, "Yes, come over." While she waited, Victoria looked at her reflection in the dark window. She saw a woman who was still powerful, still successful, still formidable, but also a woman who was learning to be soft again, to let someone see her unarmored. The two things didn't have to be mutually exclusive. When Daniel arrived, she opened the door and saw him taking in the space, the expensive art, the designer furniture, the pristine surfaces that spoke of money but not necessarily of life. "It's beautiful," he said diplomatically. "It's sterile," Victoria replied honestly. "I've been thinking maybe it's time to change that. Make it feel more like a home and less like a showroom." Daniel smiled and pulled her close, and Victoria let herself lean into him, let herself be held. Through the windows, the city sparkled below them all, those lives, all those stories, all that beautiful complexity. She had spent so long viewing the world from a distance, protected by glass and altitude, and carefully maintained control. But standing there in Daniel's arms, she realized that the view was better when you were willing to be part of it. To open the windows and let the world in, with all its mess and risk and possibility. She was ready. 6 months later, Victoria stood in a small gallery in Brooklyn, watching Daniel prepare for his first solo show. The space was nothing like the corporate lobby where they had met. It was raw and real, filled with work that was personal and vulnerable and honest. He had painted her, she discovered, not literally, but in the abstract pieces that dealt with themes of armor and vulnerability. Strength and softness, the courage it took to let someone see you completely. The show was a success. Critics praised his evolution, his emotional depth, the way his recent work balanced technical skill with raw feeling. Victoria stood to the side, watching him talk to collectors and curators, and felt a pride that had nothing to do with financial returns. She had helped make this happen, not with her money. Though she had quietly connected him with gallery owners and collectors, but with her belief in him. Her encouragement, her willingness to be vulnerable with him in ways that had freed something in both of them. Later, back at her penthouse, which now contained actual photographs, color, evidence of life being lived, they sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, talking about the evening. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, "for taking a chance on this. On us." Victoria thought about the woman she had been a year ago, frozen, afraid, convinced that safety was the same thing as survival. She thought about everything she had risked, the criticism she had endured, the vulnerability she had chosen. "No," she said, kissing him softly. "Thank you. You taught me that love isn't about control or protection or keeping yourself safe from hurt. It's about opening yourself to possibility, even when it's terrifying. You taught me how to live again." And in teaching her that, he had given her something far more valuable than all the money in the world. He had given her back herself.